Hello, welcome to Revenant Reads. I'm Vin, and this is another edition of Fresh Red Kills. So on this installment of Fresh Red Kills, which are the videos where I talk about the books that I've recently finished reading, I'm going to be talking about two medieval history books. And to start off, I was going to show a new sword that I got. I thought that, a video discussing medieval history books is probably a good time to show you guys this. So my birthday was back in April, and for my birthday, my family got me this, hand and a half sword, and it's fun. I haven't cut with it yet. That's one of the things I'm going to be doing this summer, but it's not an expensive sword, but it is durable, functional, and sharp. This is by Cold Steel. I think it costs less than $200, but it's something for me to kind of play with over the summer. If you're new to my channel, this is, of course, a booktube channel. My videos, which I make about books, they are unscripted, highly informal, but you can also tell kind of by my background, they're kind of behind books over there. I am sort of a historical edged weapon enthusiast. It's kind of one, different way of saying sword geek. Usually I'm too poor to buy swords, but it's nice to every so often be treated. I'm not really going to do a review of this. You can see it's got quite a long handle. The blade itself is fairly long. It's really more the length of like a single hand sword with just a very long handle, but that's okay. It'll still be, I think, a lot of fun to cut with this summer. So this would be a good time to do that. Before we finish up on this channel, at least, quarter two of Historathon 2025. So Historathon, if you don't know, it's an event that I created, and I've got some great co-hosts going along with me. You'll find their information below. But essentially, it's a year-long reading event where we read, discuss, and celebrate nonfiction history. And we divide the year up into 4 quarters, each quarter looking at a different time period of history. Quarter 1 was prehistory up to the year 500 CE, and quarter 2, which really just ended, and these books relate to it, looked at the years 500 to 1500. If you want to participate in a Historathon, all you got to do is read nonfiction history that looks at those time periods. And the last 2 books that I read for that are right here. So again, that's going to be my focus of this video. The first one that I finished, and this took me, both of these, by the way, I read in June. This one took me most of June, more than, definitely more than half the month. This is Powers and Thrones, A New History of the Middle Ages by Dan Jones. Dan Jones is a very popular historical author. This is the first book that I've read by him, though, but I know that, people who read him generally love him. And I was excited to get to this. I teach middle school social studies, and just this past year, we did do a curriculum change. So I am now covering the Middle Ages. So I know a lot about the Middle Ages, but I know a lot about certain parts of the Middle Ages. And I really wanted to get kind of a general history to tie things together, maybe get some things that I can bring into the classroom so that the students can better understand, and also, of course, help me better understand. And I thought Dan Jones did a really, really good job. I mean, this is, easy to read, engaging, informative. He lays things out in a very, clear, understandable way, but it's never boring. He knows how to, sort of like pick some of the juiciest bits to keep you engaged. Just when the reader might be maybe drifting a little bit, he'll, know to throw, an interesting figure or story your way just to kind of reel you back in. And this covers, it's a thick book. Like I said, it took me a couple weeks to get through. It's almost 600 pages, and it does have some nice, full color images in here as well. The plates. It covers 1,000 years, so really it covers from the fall of the Western Roman Empire to the Protestant Reformation. And I think that's one of the interesting things here is that it really does include the Renaissance. He doesn't distinguish the Renaissance from the Middle Ages. He even has, a bit of conversation in here about whether or not the Renaissance should be looked at as a separate thing, as it has so often been presented. Talking about different historians who kind of say, no, this is still really basically part of the Middle Ages. And he presents it that way. So the last chapter is about Protestants, but the previous chapter before that is navigators. So, explorers / conquerors. and before that, renewers. So that goes into, what we would call basically the Renaissance. And he is also taking not entirely a global perspective, but he does remember to look beyond Europe for change. He has a chapter dedicated to Arabs, but also one dedicated to Mongols and the major impact that the Mongol invasions had on Europe. And he does a great job kind of showing what impacted, what changed. And even though it's called Powers and Thrones, which, it makes you feel like this would be, purely political history, but it's not really. He looks at everything from, like I said, foreign invasions to climate impacting things, of course, disease, different technologies. He brings in all the different sort of ingredients that not just made up the Middle Ages, but also, kind of push the Middle Ages forward to what you maybe call the Renaissance and then beyond to the modern era. And yeah, I really enjoyed this. Like I said, it's a thick book, but it goes by nicely. It goes by really, really nicely. He's very, very readable. And like I said, engaging. I had a lot of fun. You can kind of see his chapters they're in roughly chronological order, but they are organized thematically. If anybody wanted to kind of pause on the video, you can see he's got a section, Imperium, Dominion, Rebirth, and Revolution. And within those sections, for instance, the very first one, Imperium, you have Romans, Barbarians, Byzantines, and Arabs. So each section is divided into 4 chapters, 4 thematic chapters, but it all makes sense and it all goes together really, really well. So yeah, I was impressed. Again, it's a popular work. It's not, not meant as scholarship, but it's great. It's really good. I can't wait to read more Dan Jones. I do have his Plantagenets right there, right where my thumb is. So I think that's definitely going to be a read for me for next year for quarter 2. And a much quicker read. This is a little over 200 pages. And it's not filled with images, but it does have some nice images to go along with the text. And one of those topics is really right up my alley. My channel is called Revenant Reads because I'm a horror fan. Mostly, I'm a big horror movie fan. I sometimes read horror, but most of my reading passion ends up being nonfiction history, but sometimes I manage to fit things in. But I do also sometimes read horror studies, and even my master thesis in history was all about horror studies. So I love when my various interests can intersect into books like this. So this is Monsters in the Anglo-Saxon World, Basilisks and Beowulf by Tim Flight. So I do, of course, I have an interest in the Anglo-Saxons as well. So you mix that up with monsters and we've got a pretty good time. And I really did like this study. I thought it was very well done. Through most of the book, he is looking at the Anglo-Saxon worldview, and they often would see monsters as inhabiting the wilderness. So you had the civilized world, which was the Christian world, and then monsters inhabit the wild, the untamed, the non-Christian, and especially, to them, sort of this pagan past, which to the Christians, that was equated with basically devil-worshipping past. So a lot of the thesis essentially rests on, looking at these monsters as emissaries of or inhabitants of the wild. And sometimes they're real creatures, like there is a chapter dedicated to wolves, a chapter dedicated to whales, but sometimes it's, more mythological creatures like dragons, which the Anglo-Saxons back then wouldn't necessarily have had the ability to distinguish between what was a real animal and what wasn't, because they had such a limited view of what was on the planet. I will say too, I'll keep going with the book, but I did earlier this quarter, this Historathon quarter, I had read Tailor Horde, which is all about Anglo-Saxon bestiary and looking at the way that they looked at animals. And this proved to be a pretty nice companion piece to that. That author had introduced things, I think like the wolves, definitely the whales, but this was a really nice elaboration on those things and why, whales were seen as basically, emissaries of hell almost. Then the last part of the book, which was, I think, for me, the most fascinating, he really dives into Beowulf. and he looks at Grendel and Grendel's mother. And the question he's asking there, it's not exactly about wilderness versus civilization, but it's about what makes a monster. Was Grendel human? And even if he was human, was he, how did he become monstrous? And that was really interesting. The kind of Anglo-Saxon view of what really made a monster, as opposed to a human. Because he gives an example of some things that don't look human, but they would almost consider human because maybe they're Christian or pious or something. And then by the very end, he is looking at whether Beowulf himself is a monster, and all the different parallels between Beowulf and Grendel that are inside the old English poem. But yeah, this was very good. If that's the kind of thing that interests you, looking at monsters and Anglo-Saxons, I would certainly recommend this. Like I said, it was a pretty, fairly quick read, a little over 200 pages, but certainly a lot quicker than Powers and Thrones, although I would highly recommend both of these. So yeah, that's what I read for the last part of quarter 2 of Historathon 2025. We've got Powers and Thrones by Dan Jones and Basilisks and Beowulf by Tim Flate. If you've read either of these, I'd love to hear your thoughts. And as always, thank you, BookTube.